Contra 3: The Alien Wars was released for the Super Nintendo in February 1992, 6 short months after the console's release in North America. Being the sequel to one of the most notorious classic franchises on the NES put a huge responsibility on this title to justify the purchase of a Super Nintendo. It was still a delicate situation, asking consumers to purchase a new games console just a handful of years after the release of the NES. The United States was still less than a decade past the video game crash of the early 80s. Would this push to sell a new piece of hardware alienate audiences once again? For kids, the idea of something new and flashy was enough. For parents, however, who saw a perfectly fine NES with a bunch of games, the question was asked, what's wrong with what we already have? Kids were desperate for an answer, and Contra 3 seems built from the ground up to be just that. Contra and Super C on the NES seem like fast-paced, relentless assaults. Contra 3 is actually what we imagined them to be. The game has a rocket start and does not relent. When it is not flinging unending hordes of enemy fodder at you, it's dazzling you with fancy set-piece action scenes, showing off the Super Nintendo's advanced capabilities. In case you couldn't figure out from the subtitle, you are not only fighting wars against aliens, you are fighting the wars against aliens. How this differs from the previous two NES Contra games' Alien War, or even the Game Boy Contra's Alien War, is unknown. You can go solo with your hunk of super masculine action man meat, or play with a friend and a second slab of testosterone steak. Contra 3 feels more akin to Hot Shots than Predator. The action is so over the top, it crosses the line of parody. Mode 7 is used liberally in these set pieces to great effect. Planes fly into the screen, bosses will jump up and down, and larger enemies will stretch into form. But there is more than new fancy hardware tricks. Backgrounds are far more detailed. The ruined cityscape of Level 1 tells more of a story than anything in any previous Contra game. Level 3's industrial smokestacks have depth not seen in many 16-bit games at the time, let alone previous gen titles. The music is always amping things up, like nitro boosters. Contra 3 excites and overwhelms. All of that graphical grandeur is not a facade for a simple reskin of NES Contra. Multiple additions provide a gameplay leap. The two most immediately noticeable improvements involve your arsenal. You can now carry two weapons at the same time, and switch at will along with screen-clearing bombs. The additional weapon improves gameplay considerably. The strategy is no longer get spread and never lose it. Different weapons are called for depending on the situation. Except for the laser. Laser always sucks. Never get the laser. Fuck the laser. 2 of Contra 3's 6 levels are from a rotating overhead perspective instead of side-scrolling. They seem like a good idea, but something simply does not click. They are not bad enough to act as a barrier to continue the game. They are easier than the regular levels, and that helps. But it does not have the effortless flow that normal gameplay has. There are control issues. Turning is handled by the L and R buttons, but inputs are often missed. Overhead bosses improve matters a bit. Overall, it's not bad, but it's not all that good either. There are extra modes of mobility as well. Get ready to hang and climb a lot. Spinning hang bars add extra platforming challenge, and fighting enemies while hanging requires new tactics of evasion and attack. Bosses that include hanging and climbing are big highlights. Difficulty is on a similar level to its NES predecessors. I've always found Contra to have deceiving difficulty. It's simply not as hard as its reputation implies. In Contra, you die in a single hit, and it does not even remotely ease you in, creating the impression of imposing difficulty. it can lead to some extremely embarrassing first runs. The reality is that it's pretty easy to get a hold of, and once you do, difficulty doesn't scale up as much as it does in other games. On a scale of 1 to 10, there isn't much room to go up if you start at 5. Like earlier games, once you get good, you can run through the entire game in 25 to 30 minutes. You can have up to 7 lives and 4 continues, but that's it. And don't think you can use the Konami code here. Unless you have the Japanese version, there is no way to get 30 lives. Contra is intimidating, but with just a little practice, easy to master. You just have to die, 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 die. Nintendo could not have asked for a more perfect early SNES game than Contra 3. It checked virtually every box they needed it to. It was a fast, edgy action game that appealed to Sega's core fanbase. It successfully brought a classic franchise associated with them to the next gen. And it was the game that practically ran to the rooftops and said, "I am the future, and the NES simply isn't good enough." For Konami, this game, even more than Super Castlevania 4, was the prototype for how it would push all boundaries in its future 16-bit titles. Every game would need to have elements that would make you do a double take. It all started here.